Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com and the Hook 'em Horn Show. It has been a long while, I know, since the last time we've recorded. Around playoff time was really the last time we were active. I personally took some time away just to get a breather after the season was over. It's kind of running a busy ship for me, but also if you've seen any stuff with content creators before or anything like that, you might know that things like copyright strikes for certain videos, certain content usage, even though we might not have even been trying to use it to make a profit or anything off our videos just from like ad revenue or whatever that be. We don't really have Patreon or anything like that either. Just try to, kind of build up a community, get y'all, a little bit more involved, get you to know our work, stuff at the site a little bit better like that. But ran into issues with that as well, as I know quite a few YouTubers in the sports, entertainment, music space end up getting caught up in. So, but been dealing with that. And so we're back. I'm going to try to be on more of like a weekly upload schedule from here on out. More TBD on that, but we got spring ball right now. We got the NCAA tournament, Texas getting the 7th seed. That's what we're talking about here today is, Texas. I think it's a very favorable matchup in the end, or not just matchup in the first round, but a pretty favorable path for the NCAA tournament. You avoid having to face a 1 seed. I think as far as like the 10 seeds go that they could be playing, I think both are pretty advantageous matchups for the Longhorns. Given the way that the season finished with that, double-digit lead blown loss to Kansas State in the second round of the Big 12 tournament last week, I think that, things are trending pretty positively for Texas, where you could easily see Texas getting a round 1 victory for the 4th consecutive year. And, I think for me, as much of a roller coaster ride as the first year under Rodney Terry has been, especially in Big 12 play, I think that, it would still be a decent season, all things considered, for his first year as the full-time head coach, if we can come out with a victory. I guess, Shane, kind of get your thoughts on just briefly on the season and, kind of the dynamic right here. I guess I'll mention too, Texas would either play the winner of the 10 seed playing game, Virginia or Colorado State.
Yeah, so first off, it feels good to be back on the channel. Like you said, a couple-month layoff, but we've been locked in on the hoop season, chatting about it on the side. So I think, ups and downs this season, to say the least. There were times when I was, like completely bought out, still watching, but I'm like, this team might not even be a tournament team. And then, they beat some really good opponents. So, all in all, kind of put it together towards the end of the season. The loss against Kansas State wasn't great, but from what you look at, conference tournament success isn't always a great predictor regarding NCAA tournament success. Like you mentioned, I think it's a decent spot for Texas to be in. We were talking offline. You really wanted to avoid the 8-9 and get paired against either Purdue, UConn, or Houston, because those 3 teams seem like they're on a tier of their own. But yeah, I think this team has talent. We know Max Asmus, what he's done in the tournament before. Dylan Dessou, all Big 12 first team selection. So they have the talent there. If they can put together some good game plans, knock down some shots, it's a team that could be a frisky, potentially make it to the second week type team. We also could see Texas play like they did in the second half against Kansas State and they get knocked out in round 1. So this Texas team really has been volatile all season long. I think we're going to get some more of that in the tournament. Hopefully we get some good before the bad happens, but I mean, they're way too volatile to win 6 games. Could they win 4 and get to a Final Four? Very doubtful, but, it's fun. This is the best time of the year, and Texas is in the dance, like you mentioned, trying to win another game. There was a time when we had a guy named Shaka Smart as our head coach where we couldn't even win 1 game in the tournament. So I feel pretty good, and I'm excited for both matchups. I should note that I'm actually an alum of Colorado State, so I watch as many Colorado State games as I do Texas games. I feel like I got a pretty good finger on the pulse if that matchup does happen. Obviously, we're going to break it down, but definitely a little conflict of interest for me. It should be fun nonetheless.
Yeah, this is, I think overall that this matchup is going to be, kind of the prelude potentially to a really marquee second round matchup for Texas. I guess I should go ahead and say, and if, I'm sure for people that follow Texas hoops or just college basketball in general close, you've seen the Midwest bracket or the Midwest region of the NCAA tournament bracket, and that, if Texas does win their first round game, and of course, assuming Tennessee is a heavy favorite as the 2 seed, takes care of business in their round of 32 matchup. It would be a matchup between Rodney Terry and former Texas head coach Rick Barnes in the round of 32. But before we kind of look forward to that too much and take, later in this video, we will take an overarching look at the rest of the NCAA tournament field. So stay tuned for that. But, I think for Texas, we can start the conversation here. At a high level, who do you think you would rather play between Virginia and Colorado State, the 2 teams in this 10-seed playing game in the Midwest?
I think it's Virginia because you know what you're getting in Virginia. Colorado State is similar to Texas in the sense that they've been pretty volatile this year. They beat Creighton in the non-con by 20 points. They had a couple of big Q1 wins in the Mountain West. They've also thrown some duds out there, losing to Wyoming. So, they're kind of up and down. If they bring their A game, they could run you out of the building. Where Virginia, they're just going to slow the pace down. They really haven't beaten anyone good this year. They only really have 2 scores you got to lock in on. And, I think Texas would be able to win that game. Even if you're not knocking down shots, it's not like Virginia's knocking down shots either. So some people, if you look at Virginia, think, oh, they always play slow. And, they won a national championship playing slow. That's true. The difference is this team, besides Reese Beekman, doesn't really have any NBA talent. Where those teams, you had Malcolm Brogdon, you had Kyle Guy, Ty Jerome, even if they weren't super high-level NBA players, still guys that are still in the league at this point. So this Virginia team struggles to score. I think it'd be a better matchup for Texas. It'd be a really ugly watch. Like, that's going to be 40 minutes of basketball where you're going to be gritting your teeth through. And I doubt Texas really pulls away at any point. But I think you have a better chance at beating Virginia. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you go off the KenPom numbers, Texas would be favored over Colorado State by 1.5, and they'd be favored over Virginia by 5.5. So I think KenPom and some of these, more advanced metrics agree that Virginia is probably the better matchup to get if you're the Longhorns.
Yeah, I mean, you can start with the fact that KenPom, I think, looks at Colorado State much more favorably than they do Virginia. I think Virginia's about 69th in adjusted efficiency, whereas Colorado State for much of the season was in the top 25, and right now they're number 38, which is 11 spots lower in adjusted efficiency in the nation than Texas, who is at number 27. And so, Colorado State is a team that, yes, while they haven't played as many high-level teams night in, night out in conference play as you would in the ACC with Virginia. Granted, this year I think is a
I'd push back on that. Yeah, I'd definitely.
Yeah, the Mountain West has been pretty good. You got teams like a Boise State, like a Colorado State, San Diego State, Utah State that have been pretty good all tournament teams. Mountain West, what did they end up getting? Like 5-6 teams in?
Six bids
to the NCAA tournament. So that fourth most in the country, and so. You don't really have that elite team like you would like with a North Carolina, or I mean even like Duke was a top 15 team, a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament this year. So, but for Colorado State, they've got a good number of quad 1 wins under their belt. You mentioned that, and that was going to kind of be the first thing I talked about was Colorado State's beaten some good teams better than Texas this season, without a doubt. They. One of the games that might scare you if you look at it is their result against Creighton. Now that was back in late November, but they beat this Creighton team that I know that this that the law of transferability or whatever you want to call it isn't necessarily a thing, especially when it comes to March Madness. But Colorado State beat a Creighton team by 21. That same Creighton team beat UConn by double digits in conference play this year. So. That still says a lot that this Colorado State team can get the job done at a high level against some really good teams. Colorado, another tournament team that they beat in late November by 5. I think they had 5-6 quad 1 wins this season, which is, so they had more quad 1 wins than Texas. And so Colorado State, I think you mentioned it, they've got a few scores. If they're clicking on all cylinders, then they're going to be a really dangerous team for a lot of teams to play in the NCAA tournament, not just Texas, but I think for the purposes of Colorado State's proven resume, their ability to score the basketball from multiple levels and the fact that they do have multiple scores they can get the ball to, I do think they'd be a more dangerous matchup for the Longhorns. Whereas I look at Virginia, very up and down in Big 12 play. This is a Virginia team that could score 30 to 40 points, 30 points, maybe a little bit underselling it, but can score 40, 45 points in a game in any given night. Obviously, that's not a good thing. Virginia has struggled to score with basketball this season. They only got 2 players scoring in double figures. Another thing that I think that plays to Texas's benefit here is, Virginia doesn't rebound the basketball super well either. Ranking the bottom half in the ACC in offensive rebounding percentage. Texas actually has a higher offensive rebounding percentage in conference play than Virginia, for all those struggles that we talk about with Texas on the offensive glass. Texas' last 5 wins in conference play, they all, they won the battle on the offensive glass each game. And so, I think against Virginia, that having that edge there, and not to mention, I said this off camera, but or off air, that Caden Shedrick, former Virginia transfer guy that really wanted to get into a faster system, really show what he can do. I think he can be a big part of this team in March and April if we get that far. Hopefully we do, but Dylan Dessou as well. I saw what he did in the NCAA tournament last year. Winning the Big 12 Most Improved Player of the Year this year. I think there was a case for a lot of conference play that he was the best player in the Big 12. He led the Big 12 in box plus minus, player efficiency rating, points per game, 3-point field goal percentage. The last of those stats all the way through the end of the regular season, but a lot of those stats through most of the second half of conference play. And so all this put together, Texas's advantage in the front court, they wouldn't have that many issues on the glass, I don't think, against Virginia. And, lastly, I mentioned Virginia's inability to score the basketball. Texas has really struggled against teams that can that can shoot mid-range from distance. It's caused them struggles to adjust, whereas, even a team like Kansas State, when you have a guy like Tyler Perry getting it going, they can slow it down and start working the paint a little bit and start, playing chess, it almost seems, in the second half when Rodney Terry's still playing checkers. And so I think Rodney Terry's a good coach. I don't mean to bash him like that, but we've seen some blown double-digit second half leads down the stretch this season. Baylor, Kansas State, just 2 examples of that. Rodney Terry, I think he's a coach that's really good when you can keep it on script with Texas's 2 best players, but then, the lack of secondary scoring options, that can start to pull Texas apart a little bit. You saw that when Dylan Dessou went down in the injury in the second half against Baylor. You saw that when he ran into foul trouble in the second half against Kansas State. And so, I think for Virginia, their lack of scoring versatility would really be to Texas's advantage. So I agree where, Texas probably being a maybe 3-point heavier favorite against Virginia compared to what they would be against Colorado State is maybe like a 1.5-point favorite is pretty significant.
Yeah, I think the total on the games would be crazy too. The Rams like to get up and down. Texas can play that style of ball. Like that would be a total, up in the upper 140s. And the total right now for Colorado State, Virginia, I think is like 120. So it's 2 completely different styles of play. That's why it'll be really interesting to watch them match up on Tuesday night. And for people that haven't watched a lot of Colorado State or Virginia, you kind of get a feeling about what these teams really are. 2 points I wanted to make off of what you were saying. Virginia, in 9 quad 1 games, they scored less than 50 points 5 times. So in the 40s in the quad 1, 5 out of 9 games, which is, absolutely crazy. And yeah, just in regard to, I think it's funny that the whole narrative this season surrounding Texas, or one of the main ones, was this team struggles to rebound. And they're a significantly better rebounding team than both Virginia and Colorado State. So that's kind of, you couldn't ask for, honestly, a better draw here, because one of Texas's main negatives won't even likely be an issue against either team. And I know specifically about Colorado State, if you look at their roster, Patrick Cartier is their starting center. He's about 6'9", and then you have Rashawn Bemba off the bench, who's 6'7", and they kind of interchange. And besides that, I mean, Joel Scott's listed at 6'7". He's more like 6'5", 6'6". So Texas is going to have the height advantage over the Rams. Just quickly on Colorado State, how I see it as someone who's watched pretty much every one of their games, they got 4, horses, 4 guys that are really good: Patrick Cartier, Joel Scott, Isaiah Stevens, Nick Clifford. Scott, Cartier, and Stevens all have scored more than 2,000 points in their college career. Joel Scott and Patrick Cartier are D2 transfers. Isaiah Stevens has been at Colorado State for 5 years, and he's going to be an All-American this year, probably a third-teamer. You got to cut the head off the snake. He's hard to stop, though. in my opinion, how you beat the Rams is you take away those 2 through 4 guys, because 5 through 8, Colorado State struggles to get production out of. So if you can stymie Neat Clifford, who's a wing, aggressive wing, and if you can stymie Patrick Cartier and you can stymie Joel Scott, Colorado State's going to struggle to score. So I think you let Isaiah Stevens get his buckets and you go after the other 3 guys who average double digits. And that's just personally what I would do against the Rams if that matchup, comes to fruition.
Yeah. And, I think one interesting thing about Isaiah Stevens, Colorado State's leading scorer, doing a little research for the video, I saw he's from Allen, Texas. I know, a lot of Mountain West teams will reach into state of Texas, state of California for, talent for basketball and football. But, Isaiah Stevens, guy that was a 3-star recruit out of high school, didn't hold a Texas offer, as a lot of guys that are 3-stars from Texas in hoops will not, just because there's so much talent coming out of Texas every single year, every single cycle. But, that's potentially a motivating factor for him. Other than that, I looking at the matchup between Virginia and Colorado State, I see on Ken Palm right now, Colorado State 60% chance to win, projected final score 61-59. I believe Colorado State is a 1.5-point favorite as it stands right now in ESPN Sportsbook, at least. And so Colorado State right now, the slight favorite. That game will be played, what is that, tomorrow? I believe tomorrow in Dayton, Ohio. Interesting that, this is the Midwest region. Isn't this the Los Angeles side of the bracket for the regional finals?
No. So the Midwest is in Detroit.
Detroit, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
West is in LA. Yep.
West is in LA. Okay. Yeah, because Texas is in Charlotte for the first weekend, I do believe. Yeah. And so
so I think two quick points before we move on. Being in Charlotte, Virginia will have a strong or you're playing in Charlotte in the first round, but Virginia will have a strong contingent there if you end up playing the Hoos. I also think that if Colorado State beats Virginia, like you always see a team each year that advances out of the first 4, like they win their first 4 game and then they win a round of 64 game. Colorado State's one of those teams where if they start picking up momentum, picking up confidence, they're hard to stop. They're going to shoot a lot of threes. So like if Colorado State plays really well against Virginia and, they have that game to kind of lean on and say, we pick up confidence. Texas at that point wouldn't have played in 8 days. That could be something to look at, especially in the first half.
Yeah, and having that sort of home court advantage de facto in the NCAA tournament, I think for Virginia would be really big, as you were saying. Virginia team, I think they lost 2 games at home during the regular season, and so they've struggled a little bit in neutral site games. They haven't played any ranked opponents between 3 ACC tournament games and then 3 non-conference games during the regular season in neutral sites. And one of those wins, a 2-point win over West Virginia, 56-54. And, if an early season West Virginia team was taking Virginia to the brink, and I don't know how much Virginia has really improved since then. They still struggled, I think, a little bit in the ACC tournament and down the stretch in the ACC this season. And so, they just had some blowouts along the way. What was it, like a 30-point loss to Virginia Tech on the road is one of those that really sticks out. But point being that having that sort of de facto home court advantage for Virginia could be a big factor there. Whereas Colorado State, all the way in North Carolina, I don't know how much of a fan base they have out there. So, all told, I agree with you. I do think that Virginia is the more favorable matchup. Them getting that sort of de facto home court, and Tony Bennett's a guy that's won a national championship, so he has been there before. And, Virginia, you still got to worry about the tough defense from the perspective of some of the scoring droughts that Texas has had this season. So I think there's 2 ways to spin that, but I think we spent enough time on the matchup there. Let's take a look now at Texas's path. Path to, let's say, Sweet 16, maybe returning to the Elite 8. I say Sweet 16 because that's kind of the marker for me of, okay, if Rodney Terry makes it back to the Sweet 16 for 2 consecutive seasons, I would consider this a successful season. No doubt. I think that if he wins 1 game in the NCAA tournament, that he is easily off the hot seat next season, especially with the recruiting class coming in. You know, Trey Johnson, the number 1, number 2 shooting guard recruit in the nation in the 2024 class, top guy in this class. So for Rodney Terry, you know, getting out of the first round is kind of is the baseline goal here. I can pull this up and show it on screen. I have put together the odds from team rankings with a weight with about a 20% weighting on KenPom, adjusted efficiency and some of their metrics, for Texas to make it through each round in the NCAA tournament, the percentage chance. And so Texas right now given around a 61.7% chance weighted to make it to the round of 32. So, you know, again, if they play Virginia, I think they have a little bit, you know, that chance is going to go up a little bit. If they play Colorado State, it's going to go down. But, you know, you're looking around 63% in that range to make it out of the round of 64. Where it gets a little bit trickier is obvious, you know, Texas 7 seed probably playing the 2 seed Tennessee in the second, you know, in the round of 32 if you make it there. 21.2% chance to make it to the Sweet 16. So, you know, you also got to figure that these are aggregated statistics where it's saying, okay, this is the percentage chance that Texas not only beats Tennessee, but also has beaten, obviously, the round of 64 matchup to get there. So I think when I was looking at the numbers, Texas would have around a 38 to 40% chance, according to team rankings, to beat Tennessee if that were the matchup. Obviously, once you start trying to get into the Elite Eight, the Final Four as a 7 seed task starts becoming a lot more difficult. You know, especially I think Texas, the odds actually, you know, they might look pretty bleak compared to what Texas had last year as a 2 seed. And, you know, a decently favorable path at that. I think they had some tough matchups last year, but Texas, I don't think they were an underdog in a single game that they played last year in the NCAA tournament. And so, different story this year, but, you know, having even a 10% chance as a 7 seed to make it to the Elite Eight is pretty good. You know, 25% chance of making it to the Sweet 16, still pretty solid. And so you know, Texas, I don't think anyone's realistically expecting Texas to make it to the Final Four this year. They've never made it to the Final Four as anything below, I think it was a 3 seed. Made it to the Final Four 3 times in program history. So, you know, hopefully that's something that Texas can kind of build toward next year, and you can kind of get a good tournament run under your belt. And maybe some of the guys on this roster that will be returning next season. You look at a guy like Kendall Weaver, you know, potential. I think Dylan Mitchell's probably headed toward the NBA, but you're probably getting Caden Shedrick back. You know, Chris Johnson, Devin Pryor, some of these developmental guys. I think this can be a really valuable experience for them. And, you know, you can transfer some of that experience, as some of the guys did from last year, especially that are still on the roster, down to this team. You know, you can get some of that experience transferred down to some of these elite guys coming in the 2024 recruiting class: Trey Johnson, Cam Scott, Nick Cody, guys like that. What are your thoughts on Texas's chances to make it? And we can talk about how far we each think that they will make it.
Yeah, so I think you got to assume you're going to play Tennessee in the round of 32. It's an interesting matchup because, you know, even a week ago, it looked like Tennessee might snag that last 1 seed. Obviously, they got crushed in the SEC tournament quarterfinals by Mississippi State. But, you know, this is a tough team to play against because they guard you really well, like a typical Rick Barnes team does. And on offense, they got Dalton Knecht, who is one of the most explosive players in the country. Northern Colorado transfer. He averages like 22 points a game. Lightning quick release. Like, he's played his way in from, you know, last year he was at Northern Colorado, and now he's likely to be a lottery pick in the NBA draft. So he's a veteran guy. I don't have it in front of me, but he scored it seemed like he scores, you know, more than 25 points every other game. Like, just one of the best scorers in the country. The thing I do like, though, if Rodney Terry is able to create a solid game plan, you got to assume they're already game planning for Tennessee right now, someone on the staff, if not multiple people. If you can kind of bottle up Knecht, it drops off heavily after that. You have Zakai Ziegler, you have Josiah Jordan-James, Santiago Vescovi, who I was high on going into last season. If no one probably gets that besides me and Andrew, but if you can kind of limit Connect, which is really, really hard to do, Tennessee struggles to put the ball in the hoop. But I think that's a really tough matchup for the Longhorns. I think you got to count your blessings that you're not playing one of those 1 seeds. That said, I find the path to victory against Tennessee is kind of slim. You really are going to have to be knocking down tough shots because they guard you well and they're going to be able to score themselves.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the only 1 seed I would have wanted to play, and I get that they're the lowest 1 seed. I'll frame it this way. Who would you rather play? Tennessee as a 2 seed in the second round, or UNC, the final 1 seed if you're Texas?
That's a really good question. It's a toss-up. I don't have a strong preference either way. I think I might lean Tennessee just because I think UNC has more ways to beat you with Cormac Ryan getting hot. Obviously, RJ Davis is an All-American. Baycott down low, Harrison Ingram on the wing, where I feel like this Tennessee team relies on Dalton Connect. So if you're able to shut him down or you get an off day from him like you did in the quarterfinals of the SEC tournament against Mississippi State, you got a real shot to win. That said, the off days from Connect don't happen too often.
Yeah, I'd agree where you can. Yeah, it scares me a little bit that Texas's backcourt defense has been so spotty this season, and that really your most consistent backcourt defender. And all props to him. I think it has not been talked about enough how good Tyrese Hunter has been with his perimeter defense down the stretch this season. He's taken it up a notch, playing the best defense of his career in the last couple of months. That said, Max Smith's not a very good defender. She's just not very tall, not really his thing. Saves up a lot of energy to initiate the offense. That's we had a guy, Marcus Carr, last year that was one of the best perimeter defending guards in the Big 12. And so, you've kind of seen that flip on its head where Texas, I'd be concerned about that Tennessee matchup on the perimeter, but you're right, where if Dalton Connect is going, is just not shooting the ball well, whatever that be, that Texas, could get some good contributions from Dylan DeSue, from Max Smith, and potentially a guy like an Ithiel Horton or Kendall Weaver to get some energy going and potentially maybe like a 3 or 5 point upset win. Tennessee's had some stinkers this year, like you said, when Connect has been off his game. And so it's the NCAA tournament, wild things happen. Also, it's Rick Barnes. He's been one of the second round exits.
Yep. And so, I think that's kind of, an overarching thing of this region that's interesting. You got the 1 seed Purdue, who is prone to early exits. You got the 2 seed Tennessee, who's prone to early exits. And you got the 3 seed Creighton, who's, never made a Final Four. Obviously made the Elite Eight last year, but has been kind of prone to early exits since McDermott took over. So it's really interesting how the top 3 seeds all have that kind of monkey on their back. I don't think we're going to go ahead and preview everything, but I think it's a pretty safe bet that Creighton makes the Sweet 16. So for Texas to make an Elite Eight, they're likely going to have to beat the 2-seeded Volunteers and beat the 3-seeded Blue Jays, which is a very, very tall task because those are 2 of the best 10 teams in the country for my money.
I guess the positive to Creighton is there are some landmines there where I think Oregon could get hot, and Oregon could be that 11 seed that makes it to the Sweet 16. Then if Texas plays them as an 11-7, because we had Penn State in the Sweet 16 last year, yeah, or was that Xavier?
We had Xavier as the
Xavier, right? I'm thinking we're 7 seed, yeah. Where Penn State though was the team that was looking to get hot,
yeah,
and that was among the games that Texas won in the NCAA tournament. That was the toughest, I thought.
Definitely.
And so we'll see. Those 11 seeds, some of those 11, 12 seeds, they can be dangerous, especially with Oregon getting hot at this time of year. And so you said, we're not previewing every single game, every single matchup, things like that. Before we get on to just taking a look at the Final Four, national championship picks, things like that, we'll give our picks for Texas in the NCAA tournament. How far do you think Texas goes? What do you think the ceiling is?
So right now I have them bowing out in the second round to Tennessee. And just from what we've seen, we discussed that at the top, the volatility of the Longhorns. I think that's a game that I would not be surprised if Tennessee kind of took it and ran away with it, 15-point win. That's kind of how I see it right now. That said, and what's so funny and frustrating about this Texas team is you got a guy like Max Smith, you got a guy like Dylan DeSue, Tyrese Hunter was on the Elite Eight team last year. Like, you have the talent and the pieces where you could conceivably, play with anyone in the gym. Like, you saw Texas probably should have beat Houston in Austin earlier this year. So this is a team that could find lightning in a bottle and beat anyone. It's just that consistency. I don't think they can stack wins on top of wins. So I think, for a ceiling, it's an Elite Eight ceiling. But I'm predicting a round of 32 bow out to Tennessee.
Yeah, and let's not forget, I mean, this is a Texas team that was hanging within a couple of possessions of UConn at MSG back in
Without
November.
Dessou. Yeah.
Yeah. And, sure, Texas was clicking on all cylinders in the second half, and that was a very important part of hanging around in that game. I think also there was a tinge of teams not quite knowing what to do with Max Asmus yet. And I think a lot of teams have started figuring out defend the high ball screen, occasionally send double teams, really make sure you're choking off his ability to pull up from deep. But that said, again, you got Dylan Dessou back in the mix. Then Texas, I think, can go as far as their big three of Tyrese Hunter, Max Asmus, and Dylan Dessou affords them. And Tyrese Hunter is the X factor in that mix. Sure, you got to hope Dessou stays healthy this time. Yeah, you can't really have any cold shooting games for Max Asmus. Granted, I think against Virginia or Colorado State, you could probably get away with that if Dessou and you get one other guy to step up. I think that. Sorry, what did you say the ceiling on the team was?
I think the ceiling is the Elite Eight. I just don't think Texas can string together more than 3 wins in this tournament.
That's fair. I would go with the ceiling being the same. I think the realistic ceiling is probably the Sweet 16 for me. But that said, yeah, I think Texas is probably out in the round of 32. I mean, I guess the thing I would say if you're Texas, you got to hope for one of those 15 versus 2 miracles. Yeah. The thing we haven't said yet, who I don't know if you know who Tennessee's playing, 15 seed St. Peter's.
I know. I was going to mention that, like, there's just no way that St. Peter's can win another game. Like, there's but
that'd be crazy.
They've used up all their university good luck juice. But I think one other interesting point, it's going to be unfortunate because Max Asmus is likely to have had a better tournament run at Oral Roberts than he will at Texas when Oral Roberts reached the Sweet 16 in 2021. So that's unfortunate. All things considered, one of the best scorers of all time in college basketball, and you're probably not going to win more than 1 game in the tournament. But you never know. That's why we play the games.
That tournament experience though is going to really. I think that's going to be value for him at this point. It shows what he needs to do for this team to be successful.
Yep.
I think for Texas, another thing that's interesting is that if you do manage to get past Tennessee, I don't think that there's a team that is as Creighton, I think, presents a case, but I don't think there's a team that's nearly as difficult as a matchup until Purdue is obviously going to be a really difficult one, but I don't think I'm looking at the other teams. Well, you got Kansas is a 6 seed here. I don't think they're a 4 seed. Yeah. I think they're probably the worst 4 seed. It's just their lack of depth has been their downfall, their obvious downfall. And so, and playing away from Allen Fieldhouse, they've been a completely different team than when they're at Allen Fieldhouse this season. So for the entirety of the NCAA tournament, I haven't quite done all my analytics for my bracket yet. It's just something I like to do for fun, but also like to do for the site. And hopefully I got the Quinn Ewers chain. So hopefully
let's go.
And I think one of my favorite Texas basketball jerseys. I love the cream jerseys. They're awesome.
That's sweet.
Yeah. But so hopefully good luck charm here. But let's take a look here. I know you said you did your first bracket. I've done mine. Let's take a look here at who we're picking, who is a good value pick, potential Cinderellas, things like that. we can go ahead and start here. If you had to pick a couple of teams off the top of your head to say, okay, these teams are, good value, could be good Cinderella picks. I'll share my screen again of just who
Yeah,
team rankings and Ken Palmer saying.
I can give you a couple that I've targeted. I like Drake in the East. Won the Missouri Valley. Beat a good Indiana State team twice this year. They beat Nevada in the non-con. They got Tucker DeVries, who's back-to-back Missouri Valley Player of the Year. His dad is actually the coach of Drake. Last year in the NCAA tournament, Drake was beating Miami at halftime, and DeVries wasn't even playing well. I think he finished the game like 1 for 13 from the field, which is insane because he averages 22 points a game. I mean, I don't want to revisionist history of that, but if Drake beats Miami, Texas is probably in the Final Four. But
Yeah.
I think he is going to, he's going to be up and ready for this game. You're not going to get another stinker out of DeVries in the tournament. And I think they match up well with Iowa State in the second round. Iowa State's an interesting team because the whole regular season, they were insanely good in Hilton. I think 18-0 in Hilton. And then when they got on the road, they struggled a little bit. Taman Lipsey struggled with turnovers. They just were not the same team. They looked obviously terrific in the Big 12 tournament. I don't know how much I want to factor that in because they had a strong crowd there, This game, if Drake and Iowa State match up in the round of 32, it will be in Omaha, I believe. So I think it should be a strong crowd from both sides. And, Drake can play at either pace. They're really efficient on the offensive end. I have them actually reaching my Elite Eight. I have them taking down Iowa State and then taking down Illinois in the Sweet 16 before bowing out to UConn in the Elite Eight. So that's kind of one team. I don't know if you want to give one or you want me to give one more. How do you want to go back and forth here?
Yeah, so I mean, the two schools that have stuck out to me just running the analytics and just seeing the way they played down the stretch this season, I think Auburn and Alabama are the two most dangerous 4 seeds. Um, I have a hard time seeing at least one of those teams not making some noise, making it at least to the Elite Eight or the Final Four. Auburn, a team that's looked really good down the stretch this season. And if I'm gonna pick a lower seeded team, the one for better or for worse, the one that stuck out to me is Texas A&M because I think when they flip the switch, they can beat most teams in the country,
Yeah.
and I think they're a tough matchup, even for a 1 or a 2 seed. Um, but the other team I was going to go with was who you were just talking about, Iowa State. Iowa State to me, it seems a lot like Texas last year, where you get the Big 12 tournament victory, you've got solid guard play, you've got a pretty experienced team, solid on the defensive end, and you got a 2 seed as a decently favorable path. If you see over here again the weighted odds of Iowa State based on team rankings, Ken Palm odds has a 17.3% chance of making it to the Final Four right now. From the major bracket websites, your ESPN, CBS's websites like that, 15.1% of users are picking Iowa State to go to the Final Four. So a little bit of value there. I think that a team like Auburn is where you could find some real value, though, that a team that could make the Final Four realistically. And this played really well down the stretch this season. Again, Alabama and Auburn, both teams that struggled a little bit during the non-con, have really picked it up down the stretch and figured it out against a tough SEC.
Yeah, so about Auburn, I think the winner of UConn Auburn in the Sweet 16 wins that region. I think the winner of the East will either be UConn or Auburn. I think that Sweet 16 game, if we get to it, is going to be absolutely phenomenal in the 80s, up and down, back and forth. I do think UConn separated themselves. I had it as a tier of 3, UConn, Purdue, and Houston. But even just this past week, I think UConn separated themselves as the best team in the country. It's so hard to go back to back. I've seen them play in person 5 times this year. They just thoroughly dominate every team they play. It's interesting. But I do like Auburn, and I think that Sweet 16 game is going to be awesome. And if Auburn's able to win it, you're completely right. I think, their ceiling is going all the way. One other team, actually, I'll spoil one of my final 4 picks right now. Out of the West, which I think the West is the most wide open region. Top seeds in there, you got UNC at the 1, Arizona at the 2, Baylor at the 3, and that's where Alabama is at the 4, I believe. Yes, and my pick to reach the Final Four there, I got New Mexico as an 11 seed. I think when making brackets, you got to go out on a limb, and it's crazy because you watch bracket shows and they tell you the last time we had 4 number 1 seeds all in the Final Four was 2008. The last time we had all ones and twos was, however long ago. Like, it doesn't happen. Even just 1, 2s, and 3s, it doesn't happen. And then these experts make their picks, and it's all 1, 2, and 3 seeds. Last year we had a combined seed line of like 35. It was insane with FAU as a 9, San Diego State, UConn as a 4. It was absolutely insane. So I think you got to go off the radar if you want to find some value. I absolutely love this New Mexico team as a guy who is a big Mountain West, Colorado State grad. I watched a ton of Mountain West this year. It's it's honestly a sham that this team wasn't going to make the tournament if they didn't win the Mountain West tournament. They have 3 guards: Jalen House, Donovan Dent, and Jamal Mashburn. Pound for pound, might be the best trio of guards in the country. I think Houston probably a little better, but New Mexico up there. And then JT Toppin and Nelly Jr. Joseph down low. Can bang with anyone. This New Mexico team's playing really good ball right now, and I'm telling you, no one in the West wants to play them. I think Richard Pitino could get the lads going. They're going to travel well too. They have a really strong fan base, so I got New Mexico out of the West as an 11. If people are looking for some value, if you don't want to send them that far, I at least think that you could pick them to beat Clemson. I think that game against Baylor is going to be really interesting because I mentioned the guard play that New Mexico offers. Baylor, obviously, Ray J. Dennis, Jacoby Walter. That's going to be a terrific game. But if New Mexico is able to slide by the Bears, I think the Final Four is their ceiling.
Talking about teams that are like just good overall value picks. If you see my screen over here, it's New Mexico is one of those teams that has. This is among teams that are an 8 seed or lower, so almost bottom half seeds.
Let's go.
Michigan State, New Mexico, Oregon, 3 teams that either you or I have talked about. Texas A&M I mentioned as well. Good value picks. Michigan State we haven't talked about a ton. They're a solid team. I think they've looked good down the stretch. Not great, but Michigan State's a team that's been there, done that before. So I guess my issues with Michigan State is seeing them making it to the Sweet 16. That can happen. That I think is fair. I think Michigan State making it any further than that would be where I would have some qualms. Whereas New Mexico, Oregon, I think they're hitting their stride at the right time. Like you said, New Mexico, they've had some nice quad 1 wins. They've got some good guard play. And so I could see that A&M again can beat anyone, I think, on any given night when they're actually playing well. And even if you slide down the list here, Mississippi State and TCU, I think, are 2 very dangerous teams. We said it in our Slack channel the other day that we would probably rather be a 10 seed than an 8 or a 9 because, I think there was a lot of cases to be made that, really between the 6 and the 10s in a lot of cases, even the 6 and 11s, sometimes there's not a huge gap, whereas in years past there has been. And so I think that's something that'll be a lot of fun to watch this year, where you're going to probably see some carnage in the round of 64 and the round of 32 with some upsets where you kind of saw that carnage play out in the round of 32 in the Sweet 16 last year. And so, I have a little bit different mantra toward picking my bracket. Obviously, you can see the analytical kind of side that I take to this, but overall, I think that yes, you have to go out on a limb with some of your picks, but you gotta find the value.
Yep.
If you're in a bracket pool, at least, if you want to put together a perfect bracket, have at it. What is it, like 1 in a few trillion chances that you get a perfect bracket? So I was doing the math the other day, and it would have to be like every person on Earth does 10,000 brackets, and of course that's assuming they're all different. And so for one person to get one right, and that doesn't even include if you expanded the NCAA tournament. All those talks to expand it beyond 68 teams, including the playing games right now. Whoa, would that be something? To try to put together a perfect bracket. I think a lot of people think it's a lot easier than it is because just pick the better team. Eventually someone's going to get it right, but when you actually break down the odds, it's insane.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think one more point, kind of playing off you about the value. People like picking those 11-6s. They like picking the 12-5s, and you'll hear teams that, everyone is on this upset. What comes to mind is McNeese State over Gonzaga, and James Madison over Wisconsin. How much value is really there if 75% of your bracket pool is going to pick that upset? There might be even more. You might get better value picking the 5 in that case. So if you're really trying to play it like that, that's another way to think about it. Yeah, I think my recommendation, I think the West is going to be carnage. I have Nevada and I have Nevada and I have St. Mary's and New Mexico in the Elite Eight in the West. I have Nevada, New Mexico in the Sweet 16. I got Nevada taking out Arizona. Jerry Lucas, one of the best shooters in the country. I think I might be a little too high on the Mountain West just because I've watched I've watched so much Mountain West and Big 12 basketball this year that I might be too high on the two conferences as a whole. But yeah, I don't know. My recommendation is the West will be carnage, and no one I say that will get UNC versus Arizona in the Elite Eight. So
that's fair. So before we get to our Final Four and the championship picks, and I think you have divulged some of yours already, but hard not to in this conversation. What team do you think, from a Final Four perspective, is right now the most overvalued, according to team rankings?
I like that question.
So basically the odds versus the public pick percentage.
Do you have it pulled up by chance? Let me click on it real quick. Sorry. Can you share your screen?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was asking you, which one do you think?
Oh, without seeing it. Okay. Oh, okay.
No, of all the, just like it's a high seeded team. It's okay. All teams that are overvalued are usually,
I think,
high single digit seeds.
Yeah, I think Marquette might be overvalued because you don't know what you're getting with Tyler Kolek. He's been dealing with an oblique injury, and Shaka Smart's been pretty to the vest about that. I also think if they play Florida in the second. Fair. They play Florida in the second round, like that's a team who I thought they're underseeded. I picked Kentucky over Marquette in the Sweet 16, so I don't think Marquette's going to last very long. Everyone likes to pick against Purdue. I have Purdue going to the Elite Eight, so I'm not going to say Purdue. I have North Carolina actually losing in the round of 32 to Mississippi State. I know you mentioned Michigan State's a little higher on the value. I think Mississippi State's playing some great ball at Josh Hubbard, Tolu Smith. You really got to have two dogs that can go get a bucket whenever you need to have success in the tournament, and they have that. And I'm just kind of spewing a lot of teams at you right now. I think Kentucky is another one too. I didn't really know what to do with Kentucky because I love watching them play. Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham. Like Kentucky's probably the most fun team in the country to watch, but they're also very volatile. Like they don't play a lick of defense, so if they go a little cold, they are going to lose. So with all that being said, most overvalued, I would say Marquette would probably be my pick. Back to the original point.
Your point is interesting about the.
Do they price in the Kolek injury? Yeah.
Injuries is the one thing that I just began waiting in my bracket because Florida has a big man out too.
Yep.
That'll impact them, I think, in a big way. That's always the thing in college sports that is not taken into account is injuries, and so that's a fair point. Also, I think at this point it's over. I think it's hurting Marquette too much. The whole like Shaka Smart curse of not going far in tournaments. Actually, Marquette's a little undervalued with their odds versus their public pick percentage. Only roughly 13% of people are picking Marquette to even go to the Final Four. And so North Carolina, currently the most overvalued team.
I think that's strong. I like that. I agree. I completely agree.
It's North Carolina, then UConn. The number one overall seed is always going to be overvalued in a certain sense because UConn has the best odds to make the Final Four, but also 62% of people are picking them to make it to the Final Four. I think, let's go ahead and dive into our Final Four and then our national championship picks. So I've got mine ready. My Mine aren't super fun. I'll go ahead and say it.
All right, let's hear them. Let's hear them.
So I've got my final four that I feel confident about on the left side, or yeah, I guess on the top half of the bracket. I don't know how I would classify that. I'm looking at a backward spreadsheet right here. But one side of my bracket I'm more sure about than the other side. I've got
Okay.
UConn play 1 seed UConn playing 2 seed Arizona in the final four. So I do have Arizona knocking out North Carolina because I think on any given day, Arizona is a better team. I also think, we mentioned this already. Michigan State could beat UNC, Alabama could beat UNC, and Arizona can beat UNC. For me, sure, UNC could make it there. They're a good team, but you're fighting the odds at that point. Whereas if you're Arizona, you've got to beat Long Beach State, Dayton, either New Mexico or Baylor, more than likely. That's a lot easier path.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so, Purdue, I do have them making it to the Final Four. And then it's hard for me, but my fun pick, I'm still kind of waffling back and forth on this one. I can't decide between Kentucky and Houston for that last spot. Like you said, it's very rarely all ones and twos. This is my safe bracket. This would be quote unquote my expert bracket.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
After this, I will give what I'm doing in my work pool right now, which we have more people, so I have to be a little bit more strategic with my picks. And so I'll be a little bit more analytical on that. That'll probably be more fun. And then in my championship, I have Purdue beating Arizona.
Wow. You got Purdue winning it all, huh?
I could see this
I think
I could see this flipped logic with like Virginia getting knocked out in the first round and then coming back and winning a national championship. Or what order was that?
Yeah.
That was opposite. That was a flipped order. Wait, no, they were knocked out.
They were knocked out by UMBC and then they won.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
In 2018, they won in 2019. Yeah. So we'll see.
Interesting. So for Purdue, again, yeah. I just think that Zach Edey gets officiated differently in the tournament. I actually do have Purdue making the Elite Eight, though. So I'll go through mine. I have UConn in the East. Like I mentioned, I think the winner of UConn Auburn Sweet 16 wins that region. In the West, playing UConn, I have the 11-seeded New Mexico Lobos. Actually, I have St. Mary's versus New Mexico in that Elite Eight, so getting a little frisky there. In the South, I had the same Elite Eight as you, it sounds like, Houston versus Kentucky. I went with Houston, though, because I think Kentucky, like I said, just a little too volatile. I trust Jamal Shedd, LJ Cryer more than Dillingham and Reed Shepherd. And in the Midwest, I have Creighton. I got Creighton beating Purdue. I think Creighton is a really tough matchup for Purdue because you got Kalkbrenner. Obviously, he's given up some pounds to Edey, but his length can affect him. And, Baylor Shireman, Trey Alexander, you got some really good guards here, Robbie Ashworth. So I have UConn taking down New Mexico in one side of my Final Four and Houston taking down Creighton in the other side. And then I got UConn cutting the nets, taking down Houston. I think overall with my bracket strategy, I think we're going to see some carnage early. I got a couple Cinderellas, Drake in the Elite Eight, New Mexico in the Final Four. But ultimately, UConn and Houston, I think, kind of separated themselves as the two best teams. I take Purdue down a notch there because I think Edey gets officiated different in the tournament. And so I'm going to have UConn and Houston meeting up. And like I said, I think UConn's just too dominant. They go 9 deep. It's the same as last year. They bring guys off the bench, and the level doesn't change at all. Having Samson Johnson come in for Donovan Clingan, like you have two elite 7-footers. No other team in the country really has that. So I will say I looked for a strong reason not to pick UConn. And in some brackets, I will have Auburn beating UConn in the Sweet 16 because, like I mentioned, UConn I've seen play in person 5 times this year, and their fans are not fun. Even as someone who, I saw them play Texas, so whatever, that's fair. But even as a neutral fan in any UConn game, their fans are just not fun. Dan Hurley, easy to root against because he's just working the officials all game. But I think they're so good that I had to put bias aside and pick them to go back to back. First time since Florida. So
yeah, it's just so hard to go back to back. And I do think that while UConn is the #1 overall seed, it's a little backward. I actually think that they have the second toughest path of all the 1 seeds, I do think that UNC has the toughest path to make it to the Final Four. But,
Yeah, I think
UConn is nothing like their path is nothing to like sleep on. Potentially Florida Atlantic in the second round, team that again was in the Final Four last year. Then you got Auburn potentially, Iowa State maybe after that, or Illinois. Those are all difficult games against top 10 caliber teams. Whereas if you're Houston, you could very easily get to the Elite Eight while only facing one team ranked in the top 25. So, like, you look at Houston, even Purdue, I think TCU can be a dangerous team, but, arguably TCU might be the best team that Purdue faces before going to the Elite Eight, depending on if Kansas or Gonzaga makes it there. And if TCU was a team to beat Gonzaga, I wouldn't be too surprised by that. TCU is a good team. They've been ranked in the top 25 for most of the season.
Yeah. I got Samford beating Kansas. Samford, you'll see buckyball plays up tempo style of basketball. It's super fun to watch. And like we already mentioned, Kansas, no depth. So they're playing at altitude too. Another thing to keep in mind. So when Samford is running 12 guys around like this, and Kansas has got Hunter Dickinson, with his hands on his knees because he hasn't played in a couple weeks. I'll be aware of that. I will one more point, because we talked a lot about Auburn and UConn in the Sweet 16. Seemed like the exact same thing happened last year. Alabama was the number 1 overall seed. Everyone had them playing the 4 seed Virginia in the Sweet 16. And what ended up happening was 5 seed San Diego State waltzed its way into that Sweet 16, took down Alabama, and reached the Final Four. So I've been talking a lot of Mountain West. 5th seeded San Diego State. I think there's a chance that they could get there and play UConn. They got Jaden Ledee, who might be the best player on the floor if they play UConn. Just keep that in mind. If you're looking for ways to, go against the norm and not advance the Huskies to the Final Four.
That's fair. Okay, so here I'll round things up here. This is my fun bracket for work that I picked to try to be a little bit more strategic. It's not anything crazy, but it does have more twists and turns. One big one, actually. So my Final Four for my work bracket, I've got Auburn playing Arizona.
Okay.
And then I have Marquette playing Purdue.
Okay. All right. Can work with that.
Marquette is a 2 seed, somehow still viewed as a bracket buster because, yes, I get it, the injury issue, but I don't think Florida's going to be as good. They're a little bit banged up right now.
Yeah.
And, that really takes something away where Marquette still could be playing a 10 seed in the second round. Marquette against Kentucky, I think Kentucky's probably going to be the favorite in that game just because of how, again, Shaka Smart's viewed in the NCAA tournament. Some of Marquette's up and downs this year too, but Marquette could easily make it to the Elite Eight again with only facing one top 25 opponent. You got to look at path, you got to look at value here, and again, throwing all preconceived notions, biases aside, I could see that happening. But this is where it gets pretty crazy for me. I don't have much variance. I still have Purdue making it to the national championship, so I guess I'm very Purdue heavy on mine, but I have Auburn winning.
Ooh. Okay.
They're my UConn for this year, if you will.
Gotcha.
The 4 seed that can make some things happen if things fall their way around. Because that's the thing. If UConn does fall in, let's say, I guess if you're Auburn, you would have to face UConn in the Sweet 16. But if UConn falls to, let's say, Florida Atlantic, Auburn automatically becomes one of, I think, the national championship favorites at that point.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. But if UConn falls to Florida Atlantic, I don't want to say anything, but
Dusty May's price tag just went much.
Yes. Dusty May, who reaffirmed last year after the Final Four run that he wants to be in Boca Raton, will likely no longer be in Boca Raton if Florida Atlantic is able to beat UConn in the second round. I actually got Northwestern beating Florida Atlantic, but we don't got to go through every game. So
yeah, but I think that's probably good enough for this video because we got a lot of stuff for this, and I know tournament time's a lot of fun, and digging into a lot of this stuff is. It is a ton of fun. I mean, I think there's an argument for me, obviously, when Texas was playing in it, different story, but I think that the NCAA tournament is 10 times more fun than the college football playoff. We'll see when it expands to 12, but
Yeah,
this is
I agree, completely agree with you. And we don't have to get into a college football playoff debate, but making brackets for the college football playoffs can be kind of fun too. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, when you get to 12. But anyway, I think that's about all I got. Like I said, we'll be coming back with more consistent content moving forward, figuring out, what I can do more consistently while dealing with some of the copyright stuff for, just fair use and all that. It's frustrating, but I think I've got a better way to navigate forward through that. And we got spring ball right now. And obviously the NCAA tournament. So, I mean, we'll see if Texas is able to make another good run because we had a lot of good content for the NCAA tournament last year. That was for sure. So anyway, for Andrew Miller, Shane Black, Hook'emHeadlines.com, the Hook'em Horn Show. That's pretty much it. Welcome.